Hello, everyone. We're going to make a start. Welcome to this buildingSMART session. This is our last workshop session for the day. My name is Ra Twilly, and I'll be your moderator. I'll just make a quick introduction. We have our speaker, Johannes Meyer-Myklestad, partner, lawyer, and from advokatfirmaet Celibri, and he'll be introduced by David Schwaninger, partner, Bloom and Grob attorneys at law. And I'll just make you aware of this antitrust code of conduct. buildingSMART is committed to ensuring participation in the development of standards is unrestricted, and the process for their adoption is transparent, and standards that are developed do not favor any particular provider and are open, non-binding, and accessible to all. This session will last about 1 hour and 30 minutes, and there'll be time for questions at the end. We also have attendees on the live chat, so they can post any questions, and we'll come to those at the end. And the session is being recorded, so it will be available after the summit in a few weeks, and you can revisit the material. So now I'll hand over to David.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. About 10 minutes ago, we were 2 people, so we are more than happy that we're more people now. And I've been told that this audience will still be growing. However, this workshop is prepared by a group called Law at BIM. A few of you will already have heard about it. This group is quite a young group in the BSI universe. We were founded in 2018 with the idea to share our thoughts about legal aspects about BIM, because even though every country has its own legislation, there are many, many common things, and it's worth to know how others in other countries do tackle legal issues. We had a workshop in 2019 that was a few months after we were founded. And we then had quite a few meetings. Unfortunately, Corona then slowed us a little bit down. But this was then the occasion for us to publish a book about BIM and data management. For the moment in German, because it's for the German-speaking countries. But this is a project we will continue and we will discuss on all those topics in further workshops. However, today we will talk about quite a controversial topic. It's about change orders. And I don't know how it is in your jurisdictions, but at least in my jurisdiction, the Swiss jurisdiction, and I know it's from the Austrian jurisdiction, the German jurisdiction, most of the lawsuits about construction always include change orders. So if we find a way to narrow those disputes down, which maybe is not always in the lawyer's interest, but it's in the client's interest and in the entrepreneur's interest, if we could narrow that down, this would be a great achievement. And I think you, Johannes, found a way how this could work.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. My name is Johannes Meyer-Myklestad. I come from Norway. I'm vice chairman of the board of buildingSMART Norway. I'm also a partner and lawyer on the day-to-day in the law firm Celibri. I'm not sure if I have found a way, but we are certainly always trying to do more dispute prevention work. I think for my practice, I practice within construction and construction law. I work with a lot of clients, but I work regularly with the same clients, and I try to avoid conflict more than pursue it. And what we're seeing is that there are tremendous tools available to us, but they haven't just reached the contractual and legal universe yet. Which is one of the reasons why we're engaged in buildingSMART. And it's also one of the reasons why we've seen that perhaps we can add a little bit of value to buildingSMART, because you're doing so many great things on the engineering side. There's so much coming up. Standardization is at its peak, and we're going to get some breakthroughs in the upcoming years. And we just really want to contribute to that and help that also perhaps limit disputes in the Norwegian market space and the general market space. I think it's very similar what we're experiencing in Norway and what we're experiencing abroad. I also think that we have a lot of statistics that tell us that the time spent on disputes is really inefficient. You put your best project leaders to look into the past and to dig up things for the lawyers. You spend time in court. The lawyers are costly, and tremendous resources are put into dispute resolution, where you could have perhaps avoided the whole thing if you had better systems. And I think we're going to get into that a little bit in a little bit. But before we go into variation order management and how it relates to BIM software, how many here have a legal background? Not that many. That's really cool. And in engineers, and how many people have dealt with contracts? Okay, so we're actually from different backgrounds. That's really nice. It's going to make it possible for us maybe to have a workshop, maybe to have a discussion. So let's use that to our advantage and see if we can get smarter together here in buildingSMART. I'll start with my agenda slide. I'll just briefly introduce a topic that I have, which is meant for discussion. We're not more than, I mean, feel free to dive in at any time, raise your hand, or just ask me a question, because we're that few. I think that's not going to be a problem. Usually people just don't. So if you have a question, just raise it wherever it is, and we'll deal with it. I'm going to take you through how this was when I started out in buildingSMART and working with BIM, which is about 5 years ago. So we're going to look back a few years. We're going to look at what's the contractual problem, what's the issue that I think that you guys who are not lawyers can solve, and also what's the practical problem, how does it occur in the practical day-to-day world, and then we're going to look at a use case solution where we've actually seen BIM software being used to track changes and to report on changes and to avoid a trap that might occur in terms of notification. We're also going to talk about data dictionaries, because I think that's next level. So one thing is where we are today, but I do think that data dictionaries and data templates will be the future of also change control and change management. So that's going to be an interesting thing to discuss, but I'm sure I can't bring us to the technical level that the data dictionary lecture earlier today could have. So we're going to touch it superficially. And then I have a few thoughts on why we're not just changing our behaviors so that we avoid problems, but that's something we'll get to. It's the most fancy picture the marketing department could produce. Looks cool. I think I took you through the topic of today. We're going to talk about change order management and how we can integrate that into the modeling work that we do and the engineering work that's put into the model. If we look back just briefly, and this is also a little bit to introduce myself, where do I come from? Why am I talking about BIM? Why am I engaged in buildingSMART Norway? Well, I started working on this. I used to be a programmer when I was young, before I went to law school. So I think tech is cool. And I started working on this from the lookout that digitalization might make us extremely more efficient and more environmentally friendly. So that was my key interest in the whole thing. And then we started working, I do construction law, and we started working on more and more BIM projects. At least the engineers were doing everything in BIM, not necessarily the contractors. They didn't necessarily look at the model. Maybe they just got some drawings that were produced from it. But BIM was coming up more and more. And we saw that especially the subcontractors, they were maybe suffering a little bit because they didn't receive the same kinds of information that they used to in the old days. So while you maybe got a issued new revised drawing before with this revision cloud to tell you exactly what had changed, and maybe also even a form to fill out to explain how that affects time and cost, then now you're just receiving a newly updated model every Friday, and God knows what happened to it. You'll have to find out for yourself. And it's not that bad, obviously. I'm making it a contrast on purpose, but it's certainly an issue. It's harder to spot what's happened to a model unless you have some sort of agreed way to mark it, right? So we had, I think this was in 2018 at first, we produced a free open source BIM protocol to give to parties who wanted to use BIM in their projects. And we had practical tips in it. I think this is so old now that it might be antiquated, but I still have it if someone's interested in how it was a few years back. I remember we wrote about handling changes and variations, and this is in a contractual sense, right? We wrote, it's important to be able to trace amendments in a BIM model. Firstly, it's necessary in order to highlight development from earlier versions of the model. Secondly, it's important that it is possible to identify who made an amendment, because it doesn't matter if it's amended if you can't tell if it's the client who did it or the contractor himself, or some third-party consultant that's into this. Thirdly, the contractor needs to be able to keep track of and manage changes and variations in accordance with its contractual obligations towards the client. And then more practically, the contract should set out whether it is the contractor or consultant that shall ensure tracing possibilities in the model and how this is to be done. Ideally, all changes can be dated, and it can be determined who made them. It can be beneficial if changes are marked on objects. That was naive. That's not beneficial. It's a lot of work. So we're not doing that. But we thought that could be an option with an alteration code and with relevant detailed information. But this requires a high degree of awareness from the consultant side during the engineering, right? If we can automate this in the future through data templates and through data dictionaries, that might become a reality at a later stage. But at this point, I think that's not very practical. And we also say the client should also be aware that most contractors are used to revision clouds on drawings, making the relevant amendments. Parties in BIM should discuss whether similar or alternative solutions are relevant for the BIM project to best facilitate the handling of variations. The parties can also discuss whether provisions on notification deadlines should be amended to reflect a possible complexity. I'm going to touch on the notification deadlines and what happens to a claim that's not notified in time, but the basic principle, which is common for a lot of construction standards out there, I would say most, is that if you don't give notification that a change has a potential cost or time consequence within a reasonable time period, usually a very short one, then you lose your claim entirely. And the problem occurs when you have access to the project's hotel, right? You have access to the cloud. So you have access to the information that a change has been made, but no one's highlighted it to you. And everyone who works in construction knows you can't at all times know exactly what's happened in the project hotel or the cloud. I mean, you can subscribe for emails to say something's happened, but it's really, really hard to have a live updated information about all changes. But when then do the notification deadlines start to run, right? So this is a big issue. This is a challenge that we have today, but I also think it's been so for a long time. But do not think of this as an insult if you're an engineer, but sometimes I feel like the engineers are really, really focused on building the project, developing the model, right? And they're fantastic at it, and they get things built. But the contract is sort of a nuisance. I'm not sure if any of you can relate, but I do know a lot of people think of you'll hear things like the best contract is the one that's in the drawer, right? And that's a concern because they might get in trouble if they meet the wrong client, right? Or the wrong design and build contractor who's going to tweak everything to his favor when the push comes to shove in the final account. So I think we need to sort of merge these two worlds to ensure that you both engineer perfectly and handle your contractual obligations. And I'm quite sure that it's possible. And what we're seeing is while the engineers are doing the engineering, they have all the data. They have all the information they need. And it's actually just a click away to give contractual notice. So if we can integrate these two processes and make sure that you don't have to set aside a couple of hours every week to do your change order management, I think it's more likely that you'll actually get to do the change order management, because what happens is it becomes like a salvation issue. You don't have the time because you have to prioritize getting things built. And this is where I think legal background people can bring value to the engineering world and to buildingSMART. So the contractual problem, I'm not going to spend a long time doing this, but I thought I'd just show you a few clauses. How does it look like, the whole thing that you lose your claim if you don't give notice in time? Well, it starts with a contractual standard. Normally, this could say we could have fitted here, but not all of the fitted contracts have these kinds of deadlines. But this could say Norwegian standard that this is the design and build, the standard Norwegian design and build contract. But I could find tons of examples of the same kinds of regulations. Just to show you what are changes, because a change isn't any type of geometric alteration, right? It's not going to be if you moved something just a millimeter to one side, or if you just altered the properties of some object. It's not necessarily a contractual change. Depends on what has been established as the contractual baseline. So in terms of Norwegian design and build contracts, a change may require the design and build contractor to provide, this translation is official, it's not ideal, but to provide something in addition to or instead of what was originally agreed. And normally you look at whether it's changed the character, quality, nature, or execution of the services, right? And that's a very wide definition. It can be basically anything, but it needs to be an actual change based off of some baseline, what was agreed in the contract originally. The scope of work, if you will, or in the future, a very thoroughly put together list of properties from a database. That's common. So anything can be a change, and then we separate what's a regular change order, where the client asks for something. The client can order a change and it's responded to by the contractor. That's not a notification issue, because if you get an order to do something and it's ordered as a change, then the client accepts that it's a change. So they are usually okay to deal with, but then it's the irregular changes. All kinds of instructions or issues that occur that you need to deal with in a way that wasn't originally agreed can be irregular changes, and they're received not via a change order request from the client. In such a case, if you get anything on your desk that needs to be dealt with, that you consider a change yourself, you need to provide notice of any irregular change, usually within a short time frame. We'll look at the time frame formulation in these clauses in a second. And then there might be a separate process to discuss with the client whether or not it's a change or not. I like this drawing. It's what happened to the revision cloud. And it says, I think it says, please tell your guys to stop drawing clouds on the drawings. But I think actually it's actually just cylindric holes that are fairly taken out. But it's a fun picture. But the point is, it's harder to spot the irregular changes. It's harder to pick them up early. And in order to do so, I think we need some help. Because especially with BIM deliveries that are being updated weekly, maybe, it's complicated to catch everything and to give notice in time. And I really do think that with more and more design and build contracts and the rise of BIM, this is the norm. No one's telling you to do a change anymore, because they probably have to pay for that. And that might extend the duration of the project. So in a cynical world, incentives kind of tend to move us towards the irregular changes anyway. So here's the final obligation to provide notice without undue delay. In our case, in the Norwegian standard, if the design and build contractor intends to claim an adjustment of the amount payable, it shall notify the client without undue delay. Super fast is the meaning of undue delay. I mean, I've seen construction lawyers write books stating that that's within 2 days. They've never done construction. It's absolutely impossible. But that's how strict some people think that should be interpreted. If I talk to clients, I usually say a week or two, and we even wrote a book to say a week or two so that we might have something to argue with. Anyway, the entitlement to the adjustment of the amount payable shall be lost if notice is not given before the deadline. So this can be quite severe. The consequences can be big. The notice form is not really hard to fill out. This is a variation order request. It says who's the contractor. Most people will be able to fill that out. Request for variation order title. So you need to find a name for your claim, a reason for the request, a description, and then it's normal to also describe a schedule impact and a cost impact, maybe even another impact if there are indirect consequences. It's really simple. This kind of data can certainly be found in a BIM model, especially at the level of maturity that some models are today. Maturities are just rising, and we're seeing a huge potential for filling out these kinds of forms. You wouldn't believe how these forms look, by the way, because I've seen many of these forms for tens of millions of euros, max 2 sentences. And it's like, I can just see the guys who wrote it high-fiving each other. I only did 1 sentence today. and the lawyers are always frustrated, right? Because we don't understand what it is. It might even cause some tension because the client won't understand what it is. So this is a complicated thing. But I think that if we could link this to the 3D and visualization potential of BIM, if we could objectively refer to changes in models, that would be a way to increase the quality of communication. I think that's a minimum standard that we should reach for. Let's look at some of the practical problems and how the changes in BIM present challenges to us. With a keen eye, you might be able to spot that something's happened if you don't have a system for it. Changes made by someone else without giving you notice. That happens a lot, right? And I mean, you do concurrent engineering, and unless you have, I mean, there are a lot of systems now. If you look at virtual design construction, if you look at integrated concurrent engineering, there are lots of systems in place to sort of avoid that this becomes a problem. And I think all of those are great. All of those are actually trying to address some of the same issues, right? But it's certainly an issue, so let's acknowledge that. And models are distributed regularly, perhaps without an agreed system to track developments. Sometimes there is an agreed system, sometimes there is not. Sometimes there's a BIM coordinator who will be really good at checking the developments, who will do collision control every week. Sometimes there's not. I mean, depends a lot on the system. I think that the people who are really good at this, they never have conflict. They're really good at addressing things early, and they resolve the issues, they bring in the right people, but you need to spend time on it. And someone has to pay that person, so the administration grows perhaps a little bit. Also, design locks can be implemented. I mean, that's quite common to say that I need to have a locked architectural design before I engineer this grid, and then the architect doesn't care. Evelyn?
Yeah, just a question. Your design and build model, without using even digital models or anything, just a regular design and build model, doesn't it have a system of quality assurance in certain documentation goes back and forth between client and contractor?
I think there's plenty. There are plenty of quality assurance systems, but they do not ensure that these problems do not occur, because this is every day in my practice. And I mean, people are ISO 9000 certified. Certainly, they have the systems, they have the checklists, but then life happens, and there's so much happening. And how about the BIM management belt? How about the BIM coordinator? Who has the BIM coordinator? Is there a BIM coordinator? Who's responsible for it? What's the formal role of the BIM coordinator? I've developed a lot of specs for BIM coordination together with clients. They tell me what to put in it, obviously. But my concern is you need to define your roles, right? And they're not necessarily defined in the contractual market space. I think a lot of the actors in the construction industry, they have a fairly keen eye and common understanding. But then in terms of a dispute, not so much. Turns out you can look at things in 2 ways, always, maybe 3. Depends if you have a lawyer or not. And I think that's it's a big issue here. And this design locks being breached, that happens all the time. It's quite often in my disputes, at least. Maybe I have to tell my clients. The incentives to give notice are often not present, and especially for the one who will have to pay. And also, it's always an issue. Do we even have a clear baseline? I mean, what had we agreed? I mean, one way to dispute a change is it's not a change. That was there all the time. You just read it wrong. You just understood it in a different way, right? So the clear baseline is also an issue, and especially if we're going to do model revision checks, we probably need some first model, right? So let's get back to how we can address that. What even constitutes a contractual change, and also not every development does. Here's an example from practice. I had a structural engineer who developed working drawings for the contractor for a foundation wall around the building. It's shown in the purple, right? And he had to address the wall openings that the architect had put in the model. And then they issued working drawings. So the contractor started working on them, or was to start working on them. Then the architect moves the door openings. Here's another example, and you can see quite clearly that now the foundation wall is crashing with one of the doors, and nobody told the structural engineer. And in this case, I think there was a contractor that had the BIM coordinator, but didn't really pay attention to this, the architect never told the structural engineer when they had a collision meeting that they were going to change the doorways, because everyone just looked at it and it looked good. And then later the change comes and the contractor builds the foundational wall incorrectly. Then they turn around and tell the structural engineer, well, it's your fault because we built based off of your drawings, and the latest architectural model shows clearly where the doors are supposed to be. And a dispute arose between the contractor and engineer. Who was at fault? And it was quite complicated, actually, because, I mean, it's a little bit of the architect's fault for not accepting a design freeze, or not being aware, or not letting everyone know that we've changed the doorways. It's a little bit of the contractor's fault for not having done proper coordination. You could argue, I represent a structural engineer, so I would strongly disagree, of course, but you could argue, and they did argue, that the structural engineer should have paid attention, should have checked the architectural model. But they had issued these drawings as working drawings. They were done. So, and they wouldn't have gotten paid to look into it once more. So the issue of how to pay attention and how to agree on deadlines and how to find the changes, it becomes really, really important. I'm going to talk a little bit about Celibri. Pasi, you're here from Celibri, so please correct me if I say something that's not correct. But I have a client who's using your software to actually be really good at finding changes in the models. And they're also using the software to develop change reports that can automatically, or that can be put into an email and sent directly to the client with any issue that they have found, and also with the monetary consequence and the time consequence. So this is not an advertised feature of Celibri, I think, but maybe in time it could be, and the functionality is there. So I wanted to show you guys how it could be done, and also this is a creative soul who's doing really good work. But I really do think that he's onto something, because he's sort of automated the whole process of finding the changes, and he's made it really easy, because that's where he works every day. He works in the BIM models, and it's made it really easy for himself to go from there and directly to the contract management, instead of making that some sort of separate Excel spreadsheet exercise. Here's a picture reviewing two models. So one of the functions that Celibri offers is that you can look at two models in comparison, and you can see what's changed, right? You can filter on some levels so that you don't get every single change in the universe. And of course, there are many ways to do this, and I'm not the right person to tell you exactly how. But the thing is, you can run these general checks of 2 models, and you'll get a list of issues. It would have shown below here if I had a bigger screen when we took the screenshot, but you'll get a list of issues, each with a unique ID, and you can decide to go through each issue, and you can make some notes while you do. I just wanted to show you one of those issues is this balcony right here. There's a new balcony that's come to in this project that wasn't there beforehand. That's going to be an additional work for what is here a raw foundation contractor. They're providing elements that they put together on site. So they prefabricate the concrete elements, and they put it up as a raw structure for another design and build contractor who has the whole thing, who takes it over. And here we have, I'm going to show you this in a close-up in a second, but here we have one of the issues that have been marked. So now we're currently in a phase called issue details. And the issue details phase, this is where you go in, try to not read all of the red text at once. But the black text, this is from Celibri. This is a real use case. This is something that's been done on an actual project. It has a title, which is basically balcony in Norwegian, and there's some code for it being changed number 1. It has a description, which is house A and B. Those are the buildings that got the balcony. And then we come to the coordination phase. And you can put your own statuses in the coordination phase. This is actually meant for some sort of coordination with different actors. And in this case, the contractor has decided to use the statuses as a way to decide if something's a change or not. Is it a contractual change? Is it no change? Perhaps it's something you just changed on your own. Is it an agreed change, or is it a disputed change, or is it a closed change? You can use all of these statuses depending on what you want to develop. The fun thing is this contractor in particular that I work with quite commonly, they use Celibri to go through all of these changes with the client. So they sit down with the client regularly, and they go through each issue, and they explain. And they also take out reports so that the client can look at it beforehand, and then they sit down and they put in agreed, disputed, closed, etc. So I wouldn't be able to tell you, maybe Pasi could, but I wouldn't be able to tell you how you would fill in this, what stage and priority are really for. But my client uses that to put in values. On stage, for example, they put in a monetary value or price consequence. And on priority, I think they just give a unique ID to the particular change. But imagine if this was a change order form, because it's very close. If you remember the really easy one, imagine if it had just the title of the change order, a description of the change, maybe why this issue is a formal change compared to a contractual perspective. You could still have the same statuses. You could have your own form column to say, fill in cost consequences, fill in schedule impact, fill in other impact. It would be really easy to employ. We're not that far away. Yeah?
Question.
Could I just bring this up?
Oh, really?
Just for our online attendees.
For the online. So please correct me if I'm wrong, right? But the way I understand it is that many stakeholders in the industry, their main business model is fully based on those change orders. So this is how they make their money eventually, right? And if you're taking away these big changes from them, then smaller changes will become the relevant ones to make the money. Are we really solving is it really a technical problem in the sense that it's really that complex, or is it more of the problem that the industry cannot develop other services or business models to work in a more agreeable manner? So that's a bit my question. Sorry if it's a bit off topic.
No, I think it's a great question. I think it addresses two issues, though. I mean, the one is that, and I agree with you, a lot of contractors are really squeezing their margins in order to get the projects. So they're really reliant on change orders in order to make their profits, right? This is a way to help them make those profits. This is a way to help them give notice of the changes. It's not going to take away the changes. The changes are there. It's just a way to see the changes early and make sure that you're able to give notice to your client that here's my change order request with a price consequence. and a time consequence. So this is actually to help those guys not lose that final chance to get a margin. Because if they don't do this in time, if they just see it too late, they might risk losing their change orders altogether. But I think it's an exciting issue, and I will get to it a little bit in the end, because an exciting question for the future is, could BIM help us automatize whether something's a change or not? Could we imagine that we had, that's very futuristic, but I can imagine that, obviously cost levels are established throughout contracts. And at some point, there are statistics in every country about the building costs for different types of buildings, right? So imagine that you had standardized data dictionaries and data templates that made it possible for you to just really withdraw what's the change, then certainly you could calculate the value. I mean, that wouldn't have, automatic change and change control and automatic change estimation in terms of prices and additional time. It's absolutely possible at some point. But then you would get the question of trying not to get the price level so low in the first instance. So then you would have to change your pricing tactics. And I think there are many, it's difficult to move the big actors on that kind of thing. But the tech is there.
So just another question as well regarding change. So one of the challenges that I've noticed, at least on our end, is that even if, and this might be also a little bit off topic, so excuse me if that's too early to ask, but when we're creating a contract with requirements for the developer, maybe design to build is a bit of not the best suitable solution when we're talking about changes and so on. But when we're creating the requirements and we're trying to find the right partners to deliver those requirements, we often get the answer, we ask, can you do this and this and this? And then they say, yes.
It's a smart answer.
And then, exactly, I'm always surprised about the answer, yes, right? So, of course, you can do like multiple tests and verify that the partners can really do this or that, but eventually, you get into the situation that you start this collaboration and you realize, whoops, maybe they cannot really, right? And I believe that this kind of requirements are often evolving over time. So I believe that even if you have the way to automate some of this today, the requirements are going to grow faster than our delivery in terms of technology, right? So how are we going to solve this in terms of our understanding of change? Is it still sitting on the same corner, the same discussion?
I think it's very much alive, but I'll tell you, my understanding is that we are working with change orders and change notification regimes as if we were absolutely on paper still with everything. I think the legal contractual approach hasn't changed much. I mean, the most conservative actors in any market space are the lawyers. It's gruesome to try to make changes in my law firm. I'm an equity partner, and I still have to work really hard to make any sort of change. We're change averse, but I think the journey starts with getting engaged in what are the options. I mean, I think AI is coming. We'll have to at least relate to it at some point. But I do agree that tech is going to outgrow us tremendously. But my hope is that perhaps we can, I think the legal market needs to share a bit more of how we're thinking and what we are doing. And then maybe the engineering market would be able to address it. But I'm not sure the lawyers are the one who's going to revolutionize things. I'm happy to continue that too. Just wanted to take us back just for a second. We had more than this issue. There was more than the balcony, right? But they go through each and every one. They put in these data points. They decide if it's a change or not. Endring, it's Norwegian for change. Sorry, I've used this from their actual layout. And then they made this report. This is a report that's made from Celibri. It's exported directly. They get the picture of the issue at hand. They get the title that they put in, which is balcony here. I think it's wall removed here. The resolution is not that good, so sorry about that. Here, I think it's a steel UPE that's been removed, and here there's a new opening in a wall. And then under description, I've taken away the descriptions. It was slightly client-specific, so I've just pointed out that that's where the description goes. Certainly, the status here is change. Could have been no change, of course. Here's the price for each item. Here's the additional time. That's a column I added, actually, because there's no time. They haven't done that in the use case. But it wouldn't be a problem at all to have +1 day or +1 week or whatever, depending on what you plotted into the issue sorting device. And then you have a client response or whether it's approved. But more or less, this whole report was developed through Celibri today. And it was sent like this on a regular basis to the client. Only new issues in each report. And it was really good because then you could sit down, you could see each issue, and they would bring up the model and they would show the client. And if the client had any concerns, like, but why did you change that? Was that us or was that you? You could do it right there and then. And everything was related to the building process instead of being related to the contract. And I think that's been, for them, it's been really a really good way of establishing communication about changes. I think everyone who's tried, anyone tried to have a really strong argument over email? It's not that good. It's not really suited for purpose, right? Because you end up in the ditches and you start writing your emails with your elbows, and then you don't really, you just take out positions, and then the dispute is there, and it's not moving anywhere. But this is a really visual way to come together and start a more maybe practical dialogue. So this is one way it can be done today. Hopefully, we'll even see features that make it easier, so you don't have to be super creative to get it done. But the functionality is certainly there, and that's the fun part. So what does this add? Well, it's easy to perform regularly. It can be used for visual and joint reviews. It's possible to detect changes quickly and underway, and it also makes it possible to provide notices directly from Celibri. You still need to perform the review, though. You need a project manager to look through things. But you can just, in your project management day-to-day tool, you can just go straight to the client and tell them what's up. Can be used today. But there are cons. It doesn't enable automatic change notices. It still requires the project manager's eye, of course. It will find more issues, I think, than there are changes. In reality, you'll see that you have to sort through a few things that are not changes contractually, but that's just because it's really hard to refine the search perfectly. It's not going to detect the reason behind the change. That's a really big one. But I think if you're a contractor, it's not a really big concern, because the most important thing for a contractor, you'd rather give notice one time too many and then get back, well, that's on you. And you can just say, fine, I just didn't want to lose my claim. But in terms of developing a tool that's good for everyone, you still need to discuss client and contractor. How are we going to make sure that whenever we make a change, it's somehow highlighted or logged, or there's data on why that happened? In the architect example that we have with the doorway that got changed, why did they change the position of the door? And why didn't they make any? I mean, that's something we would have wanted to know. Certainly there are some limit to the comparison features because ideally the models should be the same format, right? And you could have GUID problems, and comparing is not always easy. But if you're, to my understanding, if you're a good engineer within BIM, it's amazing what you can do. And I also wanted to say that if you don't have that, this company, just to explain it to you, they actually make a contractual model with their offers. So it makes it easier for them. So it's really easy for them. They have the baseline right there. And then they can just take any later developments and hold it up against the contractual model. Not everyone's going to have the time and resources to do that, but this is still really helpful if you, for example, the first model you get, maybe that's a model that even has changes in it. Well, okay, you'll have to go through those changes manually, but from there to the next, you'll find the new alterations, right? So you just have to go through one first, and you'll still get there at some point. I'm not going to spend too much more time. I think I want to make sure that we get time for discussions for a few minutes. But just really briefly, if we approach this from a data dictionary perspective, can we use that to automatize changes to the contractual baseline? And just for the lawyers then, to make it really easy, the data dictionaries make it possible for us to enhance the communication, right? So we can navigate between different sources of information, and we can handle different source structures, property definitions, and the lack of a common data model. And also in time, I guess, because people are developing data dictionaries. We have data dictionaries. It's not that they don't exist. I'm going to show you an example from one in just one slide. But we're going to have lots of them. And that's going to be a problem because then you have different data dictionaries. But I think most experts agree at this point that we'll end up with APIs to interconnect the different dictionaries. And what's most important is perhaps that the dictionaries have been developed based off of the ISO standards that regulate how to make a dictionary. So it's certainly possible to operate with different data dictionaries. I borrowed this from Frederick Graham, by the way, who tried to educate me on data dictionaries. I'm not sure he was successful, or at least he will not feel that he was, but he's fantastic. I think he has a product room session tomorrow, maybe, if someone's interested. But basically, with a data dictionary, you could gather information from all sorts of ISOs and national standards and building legislation, and you can build requirements with direct reference to where they're sourced from. And those requirements can be utilized to build a spec. They can be utilized to hold a BIM model up against the requirements and validate. And they can also be used to check for changes. So data dictionaries could be the future. Maybe it's the next big thing. We'll see. I think we'll try in the Law at BIM group at least to see if we can work a little bit more with data dictionaries, because there are some really big possibilities there. Okay, so here comes that slide. They allow for project requirements to be set with references to concrete digital requirements. And it allows tracking. This is also a point that if you have requirements that are set with based on a data dictionary perspective and based on data templates, then changes might require, for example, client validation. And that would actually maybe put us back to ordinary changes, where the clients actually order changes. So if you change the requirements, then perhaps that would be a way to say you make a contractual change as well. At least we could require people to provide reasons for a change. Imagine if you had the engineers changing the requirements, they should at least explain why. And you could log that as a historic event in, for example, a management system to be utilized. And certainly this could also be used in third-party software at some point. I wanted to just mention CoBuilder Link. I can't tell you too much about it because I've never used it, but I've had introductions from CoBuilder on what they're building now. CoBuilder Link is also a project where Frederick Grand is involved. But they are making it possible for you to customize data templates, and especially focusing on the 19650 principle of LOIN, the level of information need. So they're making it possible to define requirements that has a purpose, a milestone, and a role, so that you can tell what needs to be done, why should it be done, by when, and who's going to do it. And that's actually quite interesting. You can read more about it on CoBuilder's websites. And they're basing this on the data dictionary define. And just to show you the data dictionary define, it's publicly available. You have to pay to use it, but you can see how it works and you can search through it. If you go to the definehub.com, they have a UK-based one, they have a Norwegian one, they have several. I think they might be in Paris as well, and a couple other jurisdictions. They've built a database based on scouring the internet. Imagine when the Google car went around to take pictures of the streets. They've scoured all of the sources that they know, including Standard, I think, which is the Norwegian Standardization Organization, and they've digitalized all of the requirements for a building. So they've built a data dictionary that you can utilize in project management, both to build requirements, specs and scopes of work, and to do validation later. So it's a really interesting way that this technology is moving. I think this is basically, for now, focused on building requirements. And in time, I think we'll see that it might be used for scheduling, especially if you have a level of information need perspective. You can certainly schedule this way. And I think we'll see that it can be used for validation, and it can be used for change order management at some point, if they want to develop it in that direction. We'll see. So I've already said most of this, but the data dictionaries can give you a really solid contractual baseline and divide responsibilities based on the Loin principles. And certainly it can make it easier to check a delivered BIM model against requirements, that's for sure. And tomorrow we'll see maybe tracking of changes to project requirements, either through developments in BIM or deviations in as-built documentation. My final issue is, could we just be willing to change the notice requirements so that this isn't so difficult? I tried that once. I tried to say on the basis of a subcontractor, would you be willing to just say, we're going to dive into this BIM, we're going to build this, we're going to build the shit out of this, it's going to be great. But would you be willing to just say that we'll do the change order management without the deadline that throws away the claims? Nope. And there are reasons to be skeptical to that. I think you can't set it completely aside. I mean, one reason that's fair is that unless you have notices of changes, then the client doesn't get a chance to make decisions based off of whatever situation has arisen, right? So the point of the notice requirement is to give the client a chance to decide, should we change it? Should we go for it? Should we do something completely different? And if you're taking that away from the client, then certainly it's not fair that they end up paying. But I do think sometimes a little bit of leeway on more high-tech projects where you put model first, for example, could be the way to go, but we'll see. It's not hard to do adaptations legally, contractually. I mean, you can easily agree on, for example, we'll have semi-regular change order meetings together with the client, like the client example that I gave you have had. And we can write minutes, or we can just put it in the Excel file that we sent you beforehand, whether it's approved or not, and that will serve as notice, sufficient notice. It's an easy way to do it. And certainly, you can use tools like Celibri's functionality during those meetings. And the parties can agree on less rigid notice requirements, especially for BIM-driven projects. But they normally don't. They normally just put their stamp on a standard. And why is that? Why is it so difficult to agree on? Well, I think when we have standardization, it's an advantage to us that we don't have to think about whatever has been standardized. But I think we sometimes forget that there are a couple of things that are scary too. But I think this is something that we need to discuss a little bit more. And I do think that as long as the standards are as they are, and the notification requirements are as strict as they are, I think we really need to be aware and maybe be a little bit careful and use these kinds of opportunities that we have available to us to send those regular change order reports. That's just the way it's going to have to be. I have any experiences from the audience, but it's more open than that. If you guys, that was my last slides. If you guys have any issues or thoughts or comments, happy to hear them. And also, if you have thoughts on, oh, like that? There you go.
Slides are available also, I guess.
The slides will be made available. I'll send them to Dan, and I'm sure you'll make sure we.
But your last question is why it's so difficult. I think it's to do with the traditional triangle between money, time, and quality. And it's always okay in respect even with bid up and out bid. So it's always a discussion between those 3 points. And how clearly you are, how far you away from the discussion.
I agree.
Time there is something like a pressure cooker in there, so that line off. Yeah, papers there. Yeah. Now, for close time, everything is uploaded and you don't have time to do the exact change backlogs of all previous weeks.
Is that the same reason why we have that? I had the meme there with the guy who had engineered it perfectly. I guess that's what's important, right? So the kind of the same there. Right? It's not that people disregard the contract or disrespect the contract or don't care, but you only have so much time, right?
It's more confused because sometimes it's also on the client side, and the client side in the beginning of the process don't define anything, so everything is okay and it's okay in the end. It comes out as really costly over time, and then ask themselves, why is the project so far? No, because you didn't pay attention in the beginning of this process. So it's always difficult. Where is the fault? Biggest fault most times everywhere.
I agree.
I guess the part of that also that disputes, it's hard to decide on these kind of, it's hard to decide on these kind of innovative projects because a lot of parties on both sides have been burned in earlier projects. They say, no, it's innovation and we're going to collaborate. And then it goes wrong. And everybody's pointing fingers at each other. And it takes so much time to figure out where did it go. So I guess that's part of the problem as well.
I had a design build experience where we were issuing drawings for a couple of months every Friday. And as a structural engineer, to protect ourselves, I issued a report every drawing saying, between this grid and this grid, you can order the steel. Between this grid and this grid, you can detail the steel. And I'm just wondering, have you noticed, like, nobody wants to deal with change. That's like second order fluff. I want to deal with the thing. Is it who is most motivated of all the parties in the contract to manage the change relative to a baseline? You know, very often the contractor has a financial interest, but the designers are all going to get, they're open to claims, especially in a design build context. So what are the drivers that we could potentially turn up the temperature on to make it more worthwhile to think about change? Because that's one of the things, right? No one wants to think about it.
I think that's a super good question. So in terms of who has the biggest reason to think about change, it's the contractor, right? I mean, the contractor will have to, and it's a liquidity concern because usually, you know, you have general payments on the contract sum going through the whole project, but then any change order that will have to be invoiced whenever it's been approved, right, and executed. So it's a huge liquidity constraint if you end up having your change orders non-processed or not even sent or rejected, and you still have to do the work, right? Because all of these contracts will tell you that you still have to jump, even though there's a disagreement about whether or not there's a change or not. In the Norwegian contract standards, you actually have a right to demand that if there's a dispute about a variation, the client needs to provide security for payment, although it will be done through a third party or a guarantee of some sort. That puts some pressure on them. But certainly the big clients are keen to make an alteration to that particular section of the standards when we do contractual negotiations. But that's one way. My thought was that, and this is my general thought, is that if you are transparent about your changes, if you are educational towards your client and respectful that they don't like automatically understand everything and spend some prose on explaining why something has changed and why it's a change to the contract, why it constitutes a valid variation, then that's the kind of thing that really smoothens the journey. And those are it's an ungrateful journey because you won't be applauded for changes. But I think if you're transparent, educational, respectful, and also persistent, then I think those are the kinds of key things you can be. In terms of the total contractors that sort of have subcontractors on a technical level, for example, they usually want to turn down any change, both in terms of liquidity, positive effect for themselves, but also because sometimes that goes directly to the bottom line, right? So they might get the change themselves, but they won't pay forward. That's more difficult. And certainly, I think there are two big problems. One is where the project goes really badly, like you explained, and then everyone points at each other. That's the one thing that can happen. The other thing is you meet someone really cynical. And both of those are horrible because, most people are positive and trusting, which is a good quality in the construction business. I still think we should shake hands. Just think you should write an email to confirm. So, I'm sorry not to have like a perfect answer to that question because it's a really good one. It's an issue that we have that we're dealing with.
Follow-up question. In an IPC or a collaborative model,
yeah,
does any of the technical side of things change, or is it still as important to be aware when something constitutes a change? You just deal with it differently?
It depends a little bit on the contractual model, but most of our IPCs are the ones that we call them collaboration contracts. So the Norwegian collaboration contracts are more or less built from scratch every time, but they still base themselves on the design and build. So usually they still have the same change order management systems, but in a collaboration, those don't really work so well. So we often see that the parties decide to operate a little bit more with leeway. And so I think that's a good thing. And it's not a collaboration if someone sort of puts the guillotine down every time you're a day late. At least that's not the kind of collaboration I would like to be part of. So I do think that the IPD standards and those kinds of collaborations, that's one way to make it better. Same thing with, and they often go hand in hand with VDC, for example, often the same, right? And the integrated concurrent engineering where everyone sits together and sorts it out. If you could just sort things out and also sort the contractual part of things, that would be perfect. I think that's the model world for me. If we could stop thinking of it as two different worlds, because I don't think it's that complicated to talk about changes. But some clients need to be reminded that I have clients that are owners as well. It's not only contractors that I represent, but some owners need to be educated that in construction, we have changes. That's just the way it is.
Thanks.
Do you have any experience with such changes documented by a software in court proceedings?
Yes.
What do judges say?
I actually do. I had a 4-week trial in March that I will have over again in September because it went really well. So that's the backside of doing well in court. You get to do it again, and you have all the pressure on. But let me see if I can find the right. Slide. We had these kinds of reports in that case, and we actually used the BIM model. So we had the contractual baseline and the various, and at least 2 more models. And over a course of 4 weeks, several of our witnesses would bring up the model on the screen, and they would just navigate and show the judges. There were 3 judges. 2 of them were technical. And had been project engineers or project leaders for a long time. And one of them were a regular judge. So it was like a supported court with technical expertise. But we all looked at it together and had a really nice process. It was basically just on presentation like this. And when we and these reports have been developed because they used this for that project as well as a different project than this one. But these reports have been developed and sent over as change order notices. So in terms of the discussion of timely notice, we looked at the reports when they were sent compared to when the models have been changed. And it worked quite easily. Only issue is the judges won't be able to. I mean, they could download some free software, but the judges had some trouble opening the files. So we had to simply show them. We weren't able to have them run around in the IFCs themselves. Maybe sometime. But I think Norway is a pragmatic jurisdiction. There will be courts that don't allow it. But I think this is pretty cool. There's no reason why you shouldn't just bring your laptop and show someone, because it's a lot easier. As a construction attorney, I often stand in court and try to explain something, and it's like it's completely blank. So it's really nice to have that visual side of things. Could I ask a question? Pasi, you go first.
Okay, a simple question. Did they send Excel or did they create a PDF?
They PDF'd it.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking, yeah. The other thing, the data dictionary thing, I didn't get, like, what is the thing that it would solve? What is the...
I think that in terms of in terms of making the models easier to compare, and making requirements comparable to models. I think if we had more standardization on that, it would have to start from the same origin. But I think if we had more standardization on that, it could make it much easier to make this kind of automatic checks. That's the thought.
Okay, yeah. Because I think the data dictionary just kind of adds more data to the components, but maybe you have an answer.
Thank you. No, I have a question. Could you go to slide 27? It's a follow-up question to your question.
24, 5,
27.
6, 7.
Yes. You said it in one sentence that this data dictionary would enable us to use this data also after the building has been planned and realized. So would that help to use all that data throughout the entire life cycle to transport it in other programs, such as facility management programs?
Well, I think a huge concern that I have with facility management is something that we're really eager to talk about in the BIM group, because obviously facility management is something that there's a huge potential there. We're seeing in the Norwegian space, we'd be super interested to hear from you guys on that. We're seeing that the facility managers don't really know what to ask for yet. So we're having a little bit of trouble making the good specs for, and it might be that some really do, that some are really great at it, but we have several clients that have had trouble making good enough specs for the FM phase.
Again, I think that's what I encountered so far. So to me, it does seem like the data dictionaries can definitely help bring some more data into the facility management space, right, or the operational phase, because eventually I think one of the problems is probably this kind of loss in communication type of requirements set from the facility managers or owner operators, depending on the scenario, and the way that the executing parties eventually see this data, right? But I think a lot of the problems arise from the fact that, BIM is used today a lot in design and construction and is rarely used, or the parties that are creating the models are rarely thinking about how is it going to fit into the operational model. So again, from my experience, and this is also something I wanted to ask, is what is actually the sweet spot of the spec when it comes to defining it from the facility management or from the building owner point of view? Because what I've noticed is if you keep your hands away, you get to the problem that, there's delays, you don't understand what you invested, why is it happening, you're completely unaware. But if you go too much into details, then you kind of lose attention there, People just say, yes, we can do this, but then they figure out the actual difficulties as they go in the project. So what is the sweet spot of defining those requirements from the client's perspective?
I think that's a really good question. I think what you really need to do is find out what you want to use the model for. And that's a huge concern. I see so many BIM projects, clients asking for BIM. We like BIM. Can we have that? That'd be great. And what's that? What do you want it for? What kind of delivery do you want? Do you want an as-built model when we're done? Should we enrich it to as-built level? Should it be a digital twin? Do you know what that is? What's the definition of one? We have all of these concerns, right? Should you use it for facility management? Certainly, if you're going to use it for facility management with some sort of a success, you need to know before you develop it. So you're at least thinking right in terms of it's in the development of the requirements that you have a chance to ensure that you get the deliverable that can later be utilized in the right way. I'm not sure how detailed the requirements should be. I only know that it's really important that you have a common and joint understanding of the product, what is to be done, what is not to be done, how are you going to do it, the process is quite natural to discuss. People put that in BIM manuals, could have been in a contract, it's the same thing. There's a lot of procedural stuff in contracts.
Yes, thank you. Because I'm working at the Technical University in Delft, and we have a couple of students looking into especially EIRs, information requirements made by clients. And this is just one of the main problems, that you don't know what to ask beforehand already when you are looking into maintenance. So at the start of the process, even the larger governmental agencies have these problems also. So still, there's not just one EIR which can fit everybody's needs. It just totally depends on what you are planning to do with the information.
I feel like the problem is way bigger than this. So from my experience, we've been, in the past, giving very basic requirements in terms of BIM, really quite detailed, but also very basic. And yet it wasn't delivered. And it was even very difficult to verify whether it was delivered or not, because we couldn't open the models because the Revit version was way too old. So, we had to convert it. And then in the new version, suddenly the contractor says, oh yeah, because of the conversion. And there's so many issues in between. And it's very easy to say the client didn't specify. But then also when we get into the details and we get full commitment, I don't know, it seems too complex. And what is the collaborative model there? I mean, to say not specified enough is, for me, a difficult statement, right?
Just short remark regarding this versions. Yes, I think the main thing is just should be pushed even for the client. They need within their requirements to put that all information exchange, not work in progress, but information exchange, yes, and then published documentation or which is used for contracting, for decision making, and so on, should be based on open BIM standards. It means IFC, and then you will get totally out this question regarding Revit version or other stuff. So this could be quite simple.
You could do that, and certainly we do that in Norway. I mean, the standard is to have a delivery in IFC.
Yes,
absolutely.
we also. I'm from Lithuania, small country, but we already from 2017 our organization Digital Construction, which held by 13 associations in Lithuania, and it was developed as just BIM requirements, some part of BIM requirements, which is presented for the community. And in this BIM requirements, already at this time, we just made decision that all collaboration should be within IFC. And yeah, so
from the client side, you might want the Revit model sometimes, but that's but you might have a different purpose for that. But certainly the IFC format as the form of delivery is the natural one. I think. I also think the employer's information requirement and the BIM execution plan, it needs to come together in a detailed fashion in one way or another. But I mean, whether you have functional requirements or if you have really detailed technical requirements, depends a lot on the project, don't you think? But I think if you're not getting deliveries that are fit for purpose, then certainly there's an issue there. Maybe you could qualify your contractors more particularly on their abilities to deliver on their promises.
But I mean, I think that one of the issues we're facing as well is that when we're setting those requirements, it always like quite a few years ahead. So I mean,
right.
Eventually qualifying them, I mean, it has to be, Revit version, whatever. Yeah, all of those questions for me are still like unclear how they suit into this contractual world that we're actually living in the industry, right? This is not everything we can solve with this kind of agreements, but yeah, I'm not so sure how we actually move away from this.
But I mean, in terms of, we still have contracts today that do not require BIM at all. You'll still use BIM to engineer them, right? We'll have contracts today that are supposed to lead into a facility management phase that lasts for a long time, that's really connected with all the technical stuff that you put in. And then you really have to put in some requirements for the BIM, right? You might want to require as-built documentation and updates. One of the concerns that I see sometimes, another issue is, sometimes the clients get cold feet when they see what it costs, because it's certainly more expensive to do. If you want to do a full as-built, that's more expensive to do an MMI or level of development of 500 versus 4. It's going to cost you. If you want to do a digital twin, a lot of people say, let's go down to as-built at some point. But then they never get, and that's a frustration, isn't it? Because they never get to the point where they can actually take profit from it, right? Because it's gonna, there will be savings. They will just come at a later time. But maybe you've seen some sort of exit for yourself before that time comes. I think that's. I think we need to educate buyers also that if you buy a property that's already built, be willing to pay a premium for the as-built super BIM model. Because when the market becomes aware that that actually makes it possible to do facility management in a way that brings down your costs, then I think then the clients will understand that they need to put the money in, because otherwise they won't be competitive. Hopefully, we'll see.
We all hope for that.
We're really getting our money's worth, Ralph.
Any more questions just before we finish? Seems like we're about there.
So thank you very much, Johannes.
Thank you.
If you want to know more about all these topics and about data management, for instance, tomorrow morning there will be an additional workshop which will be presented.
On data management.
On?
Database.
Even better. Sorry. It's going to be in the morning. In the morning. The second thing is our group is still growing and still interested in people willing to participate. Don't worry, it's not going to be big. It's not going to be huge work. It's just an exchange, let's say, on a half-yearly basis, mostly virtual. So if you're interested, we are happy to get your email address or anything. We could contact you. If you have a card with you, you can give it to me or to Michael, and then we will just put you on our list. So thanks a lot, and hopefully see you tomorrow again.